of luck. The key to good counter-terrorism work is knowing where to look for terrorism. Since 2005, we become very much better at knowing where to look.
The Queen's cousin, the Duke of Kent, has suffered a mild stroke. Buckingham Palace says his condition is not thought to be serious and that he intends to return to work as soon as possible. The weather forecast: snow overnight in parts of northern England and Scotland. Further south there'll be rain or showers. Tomorrow, northern Scotland and some eastern districts will be dry. There'll be widespread snowfall in Northern Ireland and the Midlands. BBC News at 3 minutes past 10 are next at 11.
Every Monday night on BBC Radio 2, I play you my pick of the best in rhythm and blues. Next week, we bring you a special programme featuring one of the world's great guitar players, Joe Bonamassa.
Paul Jones with a Joe Bonamassa special.
A different sort of hour too, as we chart the rise and rise of Joe in the UK, marking his progress in Britain from the borderline to the Albert Hall, through the sessions he's recorded for this programme since 2006.
You guys have all the goods on me. You got like tapes of arrangements that I don't even know exist. That's awesome. It's the beauty of the BBC.
Join me, Paul Jones, for a 1 hour special with Joe Bonamassa.
We're going to do a whole retrospective of all the stuff we've done.
Monday night from 7 here on BBC Radio 2.
And welcome along to Johnny Walker's Long Players. 2 albums featured in the programme. They are Otis Redding's Otis Blue, and the first one, Dusty Springfield, Dusty in Memphis. His manager, Vicky Wickham.
It was a dream rather than a reality. And of course, only when she was signed to Atlantic, you know, the team came on board, and it was Jerry Wexler, obviously, who suggested this was the record to do and where to do it. It then had a handle to it. She was in awe, she was terrified, because, you know, suddenly she was able to do what she'd wanted to for all these years, and Dusty being Dusty, wanted it to be the best it possibly could, and, you know, was terrified it wouldn't be.
Son, and when his daddy would visit, he'd come along. When they gathered around and started talking, Gus and Billy would take me walking. Out through the backyard we go walking. Then he looked into my eyes. Lord knows to my surprise, the only one who could ever reach me was the son of a preacher man. The only boy who could ever teach me was the son of a preacher man. Yes, he was. Yes, he was. Being good isn't always easy, no matter how hard I try. When he started sweet talking to me, he'd come and tell me everything is alright. He'd kiss and tell me everything's alright. Can I get away again tonight? The only one who could ever reach me was the son of a preacher man. The only boy who could ever teach me was the son of a preacher man. Yes, he was. He was. Lord knows he was. Yes, he was. How will I remember the look was in his eyes, stealing kisses from me on the slide, taking time to make time, telling me that he's all mine, learning from each other's knowing, looking to see how much we've grown, and the only one who could ever reach me was the son of a preacher man. The only boy who could ever teach me was the son of a preacher man. Yes, he was. He was. Oh, yes, he was. The only one who could ever reach me. He was the sweet talking son of a preacher man. The only boy who could ever teach me. I guess he was the son of a preacher. The only one who could ever move me sweet was the son of a preacher. The only one who could ever move me was the son of a preacher man.
Dusty Springfield, From Dusty in Memphis and the son of a preacher man, the Atlantic Records top team behind this whole project are Jerry Wexler, Tom Dowd and Aretha Mardin. And as Vicky Whitcomb said, Dusty was terrified. David Hepworth is with me.
She certainly was. I think loads of performers, loads of solo performers at that time, late 60s, were suddenly cut loose from their moorings, you know, because they were competing with acts who were kind of autonomous, who wrote their own songs and had their own band, you know, people like Carole King and Joni Mitchell and the Beatles and so forth. And somebody like Dusty Springfield had always been rather reliant on an A&R department and producers and people to come up with tunes for her. And so it's very difficult, I think, for her to take control of her career.
While talking about people coming up with tunes, this is very interesting. Jerry Wexler, a huge Dusty Springfield fan, in advance of Dusty coming to America to make the album, he began to assemble songs that he thought would be good for her to sing.
Dusty did not present herself as a songwriter at all, so it behooved us to find the songs for her. And I had assistants who helped me, scouring the boondocks for proper material, the B-side of an old Motown record, or some old R&B classic. So at our first meeting, which was at my house in Long Island, I thought that would be a more amiable venue, a more suitable venue than the office, the phones ringing and all the frantic stuff that goes on in record offices. And so I had prepared a plethora of material, of demos to show her. And that was before cassettes, so these were acetates. I don't know, there must have been more than 50 or 60, I have no idea. Anyhow, I played them for one after another, and one after another she turned them all down. I had a band waiting, the Muscle Shoals band was waiting. They were reserved to do the session with Dusty. We had to cancel because she rejected all the songs and went back to England. It was a real downer for me.
Jerry Wexler, there's something of an understatement, I would imagine, having assembled all those songs. Dusty didn't say yes to any of them. In his book, Rhythm and the Blues, Jerry Wexler wrote that of all the songs that were initially recorded for the album, she approved exactly 0. For her, he continued to say yes to one song was seen as a lifetime commitment. Dusty Springfield disputes this, saying that she chose 2, Son of a Preacher Man and Just a Little Lovin'.
The other thing is, of course, had his original plan stayed in place, it would have been called Dusty in Alabama, not Dusty in Memphis, because as I think we'll hear, she didn't actually do very much in Memphis, did she?
No,
herself.
As we find out later on. Yeah. Here's Jerry Wexler again, talking about her happy turn of events, as it turned out.
Instead of going to Muscle Shoals, we went to a studio in Memphis owned by Chip Smolman, a terrific arranger, guitar player, entrepreneur, all-around hustler, a great record man, to his studio, the American studio in Memphis, because at that time Muscle Shoals was busy. I couldn't engage them. Maybe it was the best turn down I ever had, because going to Memphis provided us with the album Dusty in Memphis.
You took pity on a lonely girl when you said you'd stand beside me. I'll never forget you for what you've done. I'll never turn my back on you for anyone. I got so much love in you, baby. I got so much love in you. Oh, there's more than enough to last all life through. Yes, and it's all for you. My world was cold and so empty, and my life so unfulfilling. When I needed someone to pick me up, you were all so willing. Now to you, it might seem a little thing, but to me it seems you changed my winter to spring. understand the soul of a woman. Now they're always undertaking it, never giving, never offering a helping hand. Oh, baby, I can count on you. Whenever trouble calls, you see me through. You show your love in so many ways. I'm gonna love you for the rest of my days. Yeah, I got so much love to give you. Baby, I got so much love to give you. Oh, there's more than enough to last my whole life through. Oh, yeah, it's all for you. So much love. It's gonna last my whole life through. So much, yes, it's so many days, so many ways, yeah.
Dusty Springfield from Dusty in Memphis, and a Jerry Goff and Carole King song, So Much Love. The songs that were chosen for Dusty in Memphis, 4 by Jerry Goffin and Carole King, 2 from Randy Newman. There's a Hal David Burt Bacharach song in there. Eddie Hinton and Donnie Fritz, 2 Muscle Shoals session musicians and writers, did a great song too. What did you think of the eventual choice of songs they ended up with?
Well, you can't argue with them. They're all very, very high-quality songs from very high-quality songwriters. I can't help but think that there must have been a business deal involved in there being 4 Goffin and King songs on there, because 2 of them are at the last 2 tracks, which tends to imply to me that if you want these 2, you take these 2 as well. But these people, you know, did very great quality product all the way through. And Dusty Springfield, she clearly knew what kind of songs suited her. And she knew that better than anybody, you know. She talks a great deal about, you know, great songwriters wrote great songs that just weren't suitable to the particular instrument that she had. And she knew what was the kind of stuff that was going to work for her, which was generally a bit warm, a little bit sexy, a little bit sweet.
Massive fan of Goffin and King, and Carole King in particular. Here is Dusty Springfield.
I worship Carole King. Most everything she writes, I want to sing. We met in the Brill Building in New York when she was really just a teenager. She just sat and played the piano and it was just wild about what she wrote.
I think that the song choice was mistaken.
Oh, right.
That, I mean, the album is looked back on as a great classic Dusty Springfield album, but at the time it did not do well. If she'd have done Dusty Sings Goffin and King, an entire album of their songs, I think that would have been great. But you get a couple of soul records. You get Son of a Preacher Man, you get So Much Love, which is kind of a soul song, Breakfast in Bed, and then you get the Windmills of Your Mind, these kind of Barbra Streisand kind of MOR standards. So it's not a very cohesive album.
Well, I don't know. Windmills of Your Mind is a terrific song. It's a bit corny, but it's terrific. And don't forget, at the time, Dusty Springfield, like Scott Walker, like Tom Jones, like just about anybody who stood on stage and sang on their own, had a TV series on the BBC or ITV, which would be on weekly, where they would pretty much sing anything, wouldn't they? They'd duet with visiting acts, they'd do show tunes. You know, it was all about versatility. That was what these kind of performers
did. The whole
did.
point of this album was, I'm going to go to America, I'm going to go to Atlantic Records, the home of soul, I'm going to get Jerry Wexler, he's going to produce me, his work with Wilson Pickett, Aretha Franklin, Ray Charles, all the soul greats. And that was the idea, to sort of get her away from just being a pop singer.
There's nothing wrong with just being a pop singer, Johnny, as I've told you before.
No, she wanted to be thought of as a singer other than pop, and she loved soul music, and she wanted to have a crack at soul music.
I think
here was a record company that, you know, had very few white artists, you know, specialised in black soul.
Except that, you know, I think a lot of this narrative was written afterwards, actually. You know, the whole notion of Dusty in Memphis, because as we said, it could have been Dusty in Alabama. Pretty much all the musicians, all the producers who were involved in this record are white, you know, and it was as much to do with Atlantic wishing to get out of just being known as a black label and wishing to get to the burgeoning white rock market, because at the same time they signed Led Zeppelin, they signed Crosby, Stills and Nash. Dusty was very much a part of that, and oddly enough, she was the least commercially successful of that particular wave.
Well, on paper it was a great idea to go to Memphis, work with Jerry Wexler. When she actually did it, her insecurities came to the fore. There she is in a studio with the musicians who backed Aretha Franklin. Jerry Wexler's way of doing it was they'd record the rhythm track and she'd go in and do the vocal, which she'd never really done before. She sang to a finished, complete music track. So there were tensions, to say the least.
Well, we're in the control room, and she lost her temper and actually flung an ashtray in my direction. I ducked it. I was a little more agile back in those days. She got mad at Tommy Dowd and called him a prima donna. There was nobody less prima donna in my whole experience than Tom Dowd. He was so biddable and easy to work with. And this time, I got my Jewish up, and I said, Dusty, there's only one prima donna here, and I'm looking at her. But these were transient events. There was no bad mood, no negative ambience. Just little passing things.
I don't think Jerry Wexler, as he said in his book, had ever worked with somebody who had such a stickler for perfectionism.
She was a stickler, definitely, and right through her career. I talked to Neil Tennant of the Pet Shop Boys, who produced her, later in her career, and she was incredibly picky, really difficult. But don't forget, you've got to add on to this. You must have been in recording studios when vocals are being done, and it's very odd atmosphere. The singer is very vulnerable. You've got this very professional procedure of the engineers and the musicians, and then suddenly a mic is opened and somebody starts emoting in a way that doesn't seem to belong in the working environment. And I think it's a very difficult thing for singers to do.
Well, as it turned out, for Dusty Springfield in front of these great musicians and these great producers and arrangers, it was all too much to sing at that moment.
She didn't sing a single note in Memphis. She didn't feel bad about it. She just was overwhelmed by the fact that, she was in a studio where all these wonderful legends that she absolutely loved and looked up to had been. And I think it was absolute insecurity, being there with Tom Dowd, Aretha Martin, the musicians, Jerry. I mean, she couldn't deal with it. She just went into her little shell, and, only when she got to New York could she open up and sing.
It's Johnny Walker's Long Players looking at Dusty in Memphis, and one of my favourite songs, written by Eddie Hinton and Donnie Fritz, these two Muscle Shoals session musicians, called Breakfast in Bed. And to me, this is the ultimate song of the wronged girlfriend whose fella leaves her and dallies off, with some new girl, and then realises he's made a mistake, and she says, you come on back.
I can't let this go without adding that Donnie Fritz, who plays with John Prine, who refers to him as the most relaxed man in the music business, he calls him the leaning man from Alabama.
Well, for followers of Borgen, this is like Casper, who'd run off with other women and then finally comes back to ring on Katrina's doorbell and is offered breakfast in bed.
You've been crying, your face is a mess. Come in, baby, you can dry the tears on my dress. She's hurt you again, I can tell. Oh, I know they look so well. Don't be shy, you've been here before. Pull your shoes up, lie down, and I will lock the door, and no one has to know.
Breakfast in Bed from Dusty in Memphis. We mentioned quite a lot, and we've been hearing quite a lot from Jerry Wexler, who used to be a music writer for Billboard magazine before he became a record producer and a record man. Became president, I think, of Atlantic Records at one point. He coined the term rhythm and blues.
Yes, he claimed it anyway. Yeah, he was the hustler of Atlantic Records. You know, he was the kind of public face.
He was a great hustler too. Have a listen to this. I mean, this is how a good promotion man should work.
I took a shot with Windmills because of the timing. It was up for an Academy Award, so I did something desperate. I prepared a couple of thousand singles, promotional singles, and I had them wrapped and packaged, and on the envelope I said, open immediately, Academy Song winner. And I had one of my guys waiting at the warehouse, or wherever it was, or the studio, to take these records to the post office. And it was a standby thing, because we watched it on the television, of course, and it won. It was the winner, the best motion picture song of the year. And so he immediately took off for the post office, and the next morning or so, all the disc jockeys around the country got this package that opened immediately, Academy winner. Maybe it was a good move, you know, in theory, but it didn't make it a hit.
Round like a circle in a spiral, like a wheel within a wheel, never ending or beginning on an ever-spinning reel, like a snowball down a mountain or a carnival balloon, like a carousel that's turning, running rings around the moon, like a clock whose hands are sweeping past the minutes of its space, and the world is like an apple whirling silently in space, like the circles that you find in the windmills of your mind. Like a tunnel that you follow to a tunnel of its own, down a hollow to a cavern where the sun has never shone, like a door.
Dusty Springfield and the Windmills of Your Mind. And I mentioned earlier on that the album was critically acclaimed and received really well, and is looked back on as being a great album, but didn't happen sales-wise.
It wasn't the time for that kind of solo singer. You know, they were regarded as a little bit passé by the kind of burgeoning hip market. It probably wouldn't have had a lot of time for Dusty Springfield or Cilla Black or Dionne Warwick or anybody.
We're talking about 1969.
1969, you know, where long frocks and Vegas didn't go down very well. You know, it was all about Woodstock and, you know, and tie-dye and fringes and Laurel Canyon. That was the new vogue.
Well, Vicky Wickham said Dusty was absolutely beside herself with joy about the album once it was completed, and kept bringing her up and playing Son of a Preacher Man down the phone to her. And then Vicky Wickham went on to say this.
It was critically acclaimed, but sales-wise were dismal. It didn't get a great deal of airplay, and it just didn't catch people's imagination. I don't know whether it was that they were used to Dusty doing pop and so couldn't accept it, which is probably it. But there wasn't a buzz on it. There wasn't anything. It was just so disappointing. The lack of success was a huge knockback for her. She really felt violated. She felt that people didn't understand her, that what she loved, and she felt that her instincts for once were wrong, that perhaps she shouldn't have done it and she should have stuck to the same old formula. Although, having said that, Dusty was never somebody that wanted to go back. She always wanted to break new ground and go forward.
It's very well put by Vicky Wickham there that she felt violated, and it is interesting how performers don't just take it as a commercial reverse. They take it as a repudiation of them and their personality in certain cases, like famously Phil Spector a few years earlier with River Deep Mountain High wasn't a big hit in the United States, and he turned his back on the nation as a consequence. She obviously felt a lot of that.
All right, we move up a gear now and go to, well, we kind of stay in Memphis in a way. And our second album on Johnny Walker's Long Players is Otis Redding's Otis Blue. And I remember in 1965 working as a weekend DJ in a shed next to a pub near Birmingham. And I used to go as a fan to listen to the great R&B they played, and then I subsequently managed to get a DJ job there. And this record came in, and I heard this record loud through their wonderful sound system they had in this place. And people used to come for miles. It was a mecca to hear great soul R&B music. And I heard this record, and I thought, somehow, some way, one day, I'm going to earn my living connected with music. Otis Redding and Respect. Many stories told about how he came to write that song, but it was during a break of recording Otis Blue, apparently. He was chatting to Al Jackson, the drummer, talking about how musicians need to have a bit more respect.
Well, also, particularly, in Memphis at that time, there was a kind of racial component to that, plea for respect, because